Mixing with my mixing tip, using MultiTrack analog tape emulations. So this is the MultiTrack version of the analog tape. I think I did an analog tape in a previous one recently that was more of a 2-track kind of thing. And so I wanted to cover something here, which is an approach to kind of working with a multi-track situation. Now, there are a couple different ways to approach it. I'm going to show you something here, and we can kind of move it around, do a quick A/B, and you can kind of get an idea. One of the things I wanted to start with here is a Studer tape machine. And this is part of the Universal Audio Collection. This is the A800. And this is one of the all-time classic analog tape machines. What I'm going to do here is I set up the first instantiation. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the ganging of controls, and then I'm going to just kind of copy this plugin across to some of the different channels here. And so the idea being that here, I'm just going to set this up just on the drums, and there's a fair amount of drum tracks here, and kind of go through a few options. The cool part about ganging all of this together is that when I change the settings on one thing, it's going to change them on them all, and that's going to be an important thing. So we'll just kind of work a little bit here with, for the time being at least, with just drums and bass, just so you can kind of hear what's going on. Now, if I call up a second instantiation over here, you're going to see as I change settings, like the tape, that it changes over here. And that's the idea. Now, why do you want to keep, when you're working with a multi-track, the settings identical? Don't you want to do it instrument by instrument? And the answer to that really is no. And the reason why is that if you go back to the analog era, the way that things were done in terms of tape is that you didn't really have a choice. If you had one tape machine, 24-track tape machine, 16-track, whatever it was, it's like you had one speed, one tape formulation. You could do on some machines like multiple alignments, on different channels, although that was not really more likely to lead to some kind of a problem down the road with some maintenance person who misunderstands what's going on and then tries to re-record your tone reel or something like that, and ends up being something disastrous. So what would happen is you would end up just by default picking a tape speed, because you couldn't have more than one tape speed on individual tracks. You have a tape speed, a type of tape, a tape formulation, a bias setting, and then you kind of go, right? Your alignment standard, and you set it all up, and then you record, and you work that way. And you could have, by the time you got into the 80s, mid 80s in particular, and late 80s, you could synchronize up multiple tape machines. And when this started to happen, you could technically have a second machine at a different speed. And some people got into this, but the synchronization usually ended up being funny, and it was a little bit tricky to begin with, getting the two tape machines. They were actually, the motor mechanisms were controlled, and you would have to record a track of SMPTE timecode, which is used and created by the film industry and broadcast industry. That is a code that was used to synchronize a video. And there's a bunch of different varieties of it. I'm not going to get into that here. Now, what we really want to do then is, so what this does, just to kind of finish the point, is that it creates a consistency with the sound. You see, one of the things about the analog era that makes a lot of the things so listenable, it's not just that they used analog tape and the analog consoles, but that it was the same console for the mixdown and the same tape machine for the mixdown. So when you had it, there was something that was gluing all of the sounds together in terms of its sonic characteristic as it came through. And if you're interested in seeing a bit more about this, then check out my power mixing course, because I go into this very specifically in this whole concept. And what it does is it gives a certain tonal character that is the basis for all of your sounds. So if you do a mix and it's like you got one tape machine emulation here at one speed and one, different settings, and the next one at different settings, and the next one at different settings, you're getting a lot of very subtle mixed messages that don't equate in the brain. The brain can attach more to when things are processed the same, especially with things like drums. If you have acoustic drums, you at very least want to make sure that all those drums have the basic settings. You can adjust the gain independent on individual plugins, because you may be overloading or overdriving one thing versus another, and we'll focus on that a little bit. But primarily, we want to come up with one basic setup. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the noise here. So we'll start there, and then so I'll just kind of zoom in on the plugin here, and let's just focus a little bit on getting some settings here. So if I want to go for what I like here, the Scotch 250 formulation has like a nice tonal character to it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to set these guys up here, and so I can bypass them. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to push the input level up a little bit here. And I'm going to bring my output level down. And see, what I hear there is it's sort of collapsing a little bit. So I'm going to go back here. So what I'm going to do here, I want to go a little bit more hi-fi. So I'm going to go here to like a 30 inches per second setting. I probably should use the central plugin here. So what you're getting is most hi-fi, cleanest across the frequency spectrum. On this, you get a little boost on the high frequencies, like around 15, 16K, and a boost on the low end, which a lot of people like, which is why it comes up as the default. At 7.5, you lose more high frequency, but you get even more low end, so this gives you the warmest sound. The different tapes handle different amounts of gain, so this is like a way of calibrating the amount of how much magnetic field strength is being applied to the tape. So these early formulations, the 250 and 456, not early, those are like 80s formulations, were really +3, +6 was hitting them hard. The 900, which it's an AGFA tape, I think it's an AGFA tape, and the GP9 here actually are meant to handle more of the 7.5 and +9. So if you wanted to have a little bit more of an open kind of sound, you could actually go with the GP9 and then go with a lighter calibration, which is the +3. And you get a little bit more openness and dynamic range. If you went this way and this way, you'd get more tape compression. Or let's go with 456. And you can really hear the body that's kind of brought in with this a little bit. I'm going to go here with a 456 formulation. I think it's a little bit more balanced, a little bit more open. And let's just switch it down to 7.5. Now I can go to a European version of this. There's 2 equalization curves on the playback. This is a bit more open sounding. Now we can really start to feel the depth here. What I usually like about the 250 has a little bit more character sometimes. And a nice openness, so I kind of like that. So this is sort of an unusual thing for me. I don't usually hit it that hard, but it's kind of working. So let's just kind of go with it. So we're getting a fair amount of tape saturation by the calibration alignment as opposed to driving the input. And we're kind of building in some of the characteristics of it. Now we could put tape hiss in, and you can actually control the amount of hum and hiss and all of that. You can actually balance out you can actually, with the record driver, you can actually push the bias current up more, which would warm up the top end, or back it off, and it would open up some of the high frequencies. And then you can also work with the repro equalization, adding high frequencies or adding or taking away low frequencies, and it'll give a certain bump or characteristic. These are alignment setups that are part of the plugin. So that are actually part of the hardware, excuse me. And there are many more settings that are not displayed here, but these are some of the ones that you can use. There's also like a sync setting, input or through setting. Through is like a bypass. Input, you get some of the harmonic distortion characteristics of the original electronics of the tape machine. Sync is a different head. It'll cut down on the high frequencies by half. It'll be a bit noisier sounding. But these are the basic, setups and settings and ways of working it. Now, when I do this and when I work with something like this, you can hear like a certain sound, and I'm just going to make an adjustment here. I'm going to show you something because you've noticed here that I put it after all my plugin processing, and I sort of have a theory about this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy some of these settings here. So we have the identical setup, but it's going to be prior to all my processing. Now, generally, I'm pretty careful about managing my gain structure, so it should be fairly even and do this. So now, technically, the way that you would actually think about this, and hold on one second here. I think I just accidentally zeroed out my inserts. Okay, there we go. Actually, because all the settings are the same, I could actually go straight across here. I don't have to copy them channel from channel. And I'm not actually going channel to channel and checking levels, which would also be a thing. If I felt like, overall I liked the sound, but the snare was getting swallowed up, or the kick drum was getting swallowed up, I might go back and make an adjustment on the gain, input and output gain only, but leave the settings the same. So what I want to do here is just kind of show you what this would sound like prior to it, because technically if you were mixing, the tape would be the source, right? So if now the sounds are coming off the hard drive, you would want them running through the tape emulation first and then coming into the processing. But what I found is that generally today, people do a lot less processing on the recording stage than they used to. And in fact, most people just like run through, if they've got to run through a preamp or right into their interface, or they use the preamp on their interface, and there's no compressor and no other circuitry. Whereas in the analog realm, you'd be running into a console, mic pre's or external mic pre's, running through compression, running through bus circuitry, and all kinds of things that are warming up, containing, and balancing the sound a bit more before it actually gets to the tape machine. And this doesn't occur. And quite often, because the gain of people's recordings allows for a wild dynamic range, you really have to end up going into the waveforms of the individual tracks and making sure that they are not like too uneven or all over the place as you're kind of working with them. Because if you get some real inconsistencies there, you're going to get some very inconsistent results where certain tom fills just get completely swallowed by the tape and others won't. So you have to really be a little bit more careful about that. And so usually what I've found, and let's just kind of do our A/B test here just to kind of see how it goes. If we compare it prior to processing or post-processing, let's see what the difference ends up being. Because if I'm doing my work to kind of balance out the sounds here, that should give us a more consistent result on the tape. So let's listen to it. This is pre-processing tape. And then post-processing. So what I hear this is a little bit boxier, a little bit more shut down sounding. And it's kind of a little bit for the reasons that I talked about here. There's much more work in terms of subtractive EQ and kind of filtering away areas that aren't really, filtering away low frequencies and sub frequencies. And what's happening is the tape kind of eats up some of that stuff and makes a lot of this processing less efficient. It's like a form of compression. It is. That was one of the last or the previous tips was on using tape emulation as a compressor. And it does act as a compressor, actually, as a limiter, and eventually a brick wall limiter. Like it has a maximum level that you could push into it, and you're just basically pushing bottom up towards the top, and so it gets to really hard limiting, and then that can affect what's going on afterwards. Now, if I started off doing it this way, I would put the tape emulation first and then go ahead and start to do my processing, and that might be good. A better way of approaching it, and that way you're making and compensating for that first, not putting it after the fact the way that I did here. I like putting it in after the fact because it adds a sense of depth and character to all the stuff that I've already done. Whatever approach that you do, also I find that people work a little bit less hard. I have a tendency to work a little bit less hard if I have this stuff at the beginning. I think it sounds better than it actually does. And in most of what I've seen with people's mixes when they've presented it that way is that they think, oh, this sounds so much better, but it's like then they're not doing all of the other basic work that they need to. Everybody's different. So, if you're going to start with it, either way can work. My tendency is to lead towards the post-processing, put it on after just to add like the icing on the cake and do kind of all my hard, heavy hitting work just with my processing prior to it. But anyway, there's an approach, and you can go track by track, start to add instruments and go all the way across and kind of do this similar process. I like to keep it all laid out pretty much the same for all the tracks, and it adds like a nice evenness and like character that kind of seems to pull the whole mix together rather than making them all different and independent from each other. But hey, whatever works. So if that's the flavor that makes it go, then you go with that. All right, there's a mixing with Mike mixing tip using multi-track analog tape emulations in a mix.